Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a topic that blends current events with ancient scripture. Specifically, we're going to examine Donald Trump's recent trade deals and how some people interpret them in light of a passage in the Bible. 1 Thessalonians 5:3-6. Now, I want to be clear from the start. This is a complex and often sensitive area. Interpretations of biblical prophecy vary widely, and it's essential to approach this with respect and a critical mind. Our goal here is to analyze the scripture, look at the current events, and explore the potential connections without making definitive claims. So, let's begin by looking at the recent trade deals. As we know, Donald Trump has been very active in trade negotiations. For example, he has recently been involved in trade agreements with the United Kingdom. There has been reporting about how he has worked to change tariff rates between the two countries. This is one of many trade actions that have been taken. Here is a point to consider that trade deals are complex. As reported by sources, these things can sometimes take months or years to negotiate because there's a lot of minutia on exactly what tariffs things are going to have and what would be the consequence if these are broken. This means that the work that is done to make these deals is very in-depth. Also, it is important to understand that trade deals have real-world effects. As shown in reports, imposing tariffs and then having tariffs imposed on us as a retaliation, it's a lose-lose situation. So the stakes are high. Now let's turn our attention to the biblical passage in question, 1 Thessalonians 5:3-6. It reads, "For when they shall say, Peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober." Key phrases here are peace and safety and sudden destruction. Some interpretations suggest that a period of perceived global peace and security will precede a time of sudden and catastrophic events. So, the question is, how might these trade deals relate to this? Some people believe that these trade deals represent a move towards greater global stability and economic cooperation, creating a false sense of peace and safety. They argue that this perceived stability could lull people into a false sense of security just before the sudden destruction described in the scripture. However, it's crucial to acknowledge that there are many other interpretations. Some scholars argue that peace and safety refers to a deceptive political slogan, not necessarily economic stability. Others interpret the sudden destruction as a spiritual or moral collapse rather than a literal physical event. It is also important to remember that the Bible is a collection of ancient texts, and that translations and interpretations can vary. Also, the context of the verses is very important. The Apostle Paul, who wrote this letter, was concerned with preparing early Christians for the return of Jesus Christ. Therefore, the warnings given are given to the early church. Also, it is important to note the recent sale of the God Bless the USA Bible by Donald Trump. This has caused much discussion. As reported, thousands of Donald Trump's God Bless the USA Bibles were printed in a country that the former president has frequently accused of engaging in unfair trade practices and stealing American jobs, China. This brings up interesting points about the mixing of religion and politics. To further analyze this, we must look at the current global situation. Are we experiencing a period of unprecedented peace and safety? Well, that's debatable. There are ongoing conflicts, economic uncertainties, and social unrest in various parts of the world. So while some trade deals might foster cooperation, the world is far from universally peaceful. It is also important to remember that the world is very complex. There are many different factors that influence global events. So, to pinpoint one specific set of trade deals as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy would be very difficult to prove. Now let's consider how these events might fit within a broader framework of perceived prophetic fulfillment. Many who study biblical prophecy believe that certain signs will precede the events described in Scripture. One common thread in eschatological discussions is the idea of a globalized economy. Some interpretations suggest that the beast of Revelation 13 will have control over global commerce. The trade deals, in a sense, could be viewed as steps towards a more interconnected global economy, where nations become increasingly reliant on each other. It is important to note that the book of Revelation is a highly symbolic text. It is open to many interpretations, and there is no consensus on what the beast represents. Also, many scholars believe that the book of Revelation was written to address the specific challenges faced by the early church. Another related concept is the rise of a powerful political leader who can broker peace and security. Some argue that the ability to negotiate complex trade deals could be seen as a demonstration of such political prowess. This, again, ties back to the peace and safety mentioned in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. However, it is also important to remember that political leaders have been negotiating trade deals for centuries. This is not a new phenomenon. Also, the Bible warns about false prophets and false messiahs, so it is important to be discerning. Additionally, the concept of increased global communication and information sharing is often linked to end times prophecies. The rapid spread of information, the ability to connect with people across the globe, and the rise of digital currencies are all seen by some as potential signs. Trade deals, by their nature, involve increased communication and cooperation between nations. The internet and social media have indeed transformed the way we communicate. However, it is also important to remember that these technologies can be used for both good and evil. Also, increased communication does not necessarily equate to increased understanding or peace. Now, let's get a bit more specific. Some interpretations of the book of Daniel suggest a rise in global commerce and trade as a sign of the end times. The intricate nature of modern trade deals, with their complex regulations and agreements, could be seen as a manifestation of this. The book of Daniel is another highly symbolic text. It is important to approach it with humility and respect. Also, the book of Daniel was written in a specific historical context. Meanwhile, the strengthening of alliances and partnerships between nations, which is a byproduct of trade deals, could be interpreted as a move towards the formation of the 10 kings mentioned in Revelation 17. These kings, according to some interpretations, will give their power to the beast. Again, the book of Revelation is open to many interpretations. Also, alliances between nations are common throughout history. It's also worth noting the increasing focus on economic stability and security in many countries. This emphasis on economic well-being could be seen as a reflection of the peace and safety mindset described in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. Economic stability is a legitimate concern for many people. However, it is important to remember that true peace and security come from God. Also, the Bible warns against placing our trust in material things. However, and I can't stress this enough, we must exercise extreme caution when interpreting these connections. It's easy to see patterns where none exist, and to force current events to fit preconceived notions. The Bible warns against false prophets and deceptive signs. It is important to remember that the Bible is a spiritual book. It is not a textbook of current events. Also, it is important to test all things and hold fast to what is good. It is important to remember that God is sovereign. He is in control of all things. We should not be afraid, but we should be watchful and prayerful. So, as we see these trade deals unfold, and as we observe the global landscape, it's vital to remain grounded in Scripture, to seek wisdom, and to avoid making hasty judgments. Building on our discussion, it's fascinating to consider how some interpret other recent global events through the lens of biblical prophecy. This helps provide a broader context for how the trade deals might be viewed by those who see them as potentially significant. One area that often comes up is the increase in natural disasters. Scriptures like Matthew 24:7-8 speak of earthquakes in divers places and famines and pestilences as signs of the end times. Some point to the increasing frequency and intensity of events like hurricanes, floods, and wildfires in recent years as a potential fulfillment of these prophecies. It is important to note that scientific data suggests a link between climate change and the increasing frequency and intensity of certain natural disasters. Attributing these solely to biblical prophecy is a matter of faith and interpretation. Also, the Bible has described natural disasters throughout history. Another commonly cited prophecy relates to the rise of global communication and a knowledge explosion, as mentioned in Daniel 12:4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. The advent of the internet, social media, and the rapid advancements in technology are seen by some as a direct fulfillment of this verse. While the increase in knowledge and communication is undeniable, the interpretation of this verse as a specific end times prophecy is debated. Also, the context of Daniel 12 suggests a specific time related to the unsealing of prophetic understanding. The rise of apostasy and the falling away from traditional faith, as mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first," is another area some point to. They see the increasing secularization of society and the questioning of traditional religious beliefs as a sign of this falling away. The definition and extent of this falling away are subject to various interpretations within Christianity. Also, religious trends and beliefs have fluctuated throughout history. Now, with these other potential fulfillments in mind, let's revisit the trade deals with a sense of curiosity. Could these agreements, in conjunction with other global trends, be part of a larger picture that aligns with biblical prophecy? Consider the interconnectedness fostered by these trade deals. Jeremiah 50:23-24 speaks of a powerful nation being cut off and broken in pieces, and how the sea is come up upon Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. While Babylon is often interpreted symbolically, could this allude to a disruption of a major global economic power through widespread interconnectedness and potential vulnerabilities within the system? The intricate web of trade could, in theory, create points of weakness if one part falters. The interpretation of Babylon in prophetic scripture is complex and varied. It often symbolizes worldly power and opposition to God. Also, economic interdependence can also be a source of stability and prevent conflict. Furthermore, the negotiations and agreements involved in these trade deals often highlight national interests and a desire for economic security. This pursuit of safety in the economic realm could be seen through the lens of 1 Thessalonians 5:3. Could the focus on economic stability inadvertently create a blind spot to other potential dangers, fulfilling the sudden destruction aspect? It is natural for nations to prioritize their economic well-being. However, the Bible warns against placing ultimate security in earthly possessions. Also, the nature of the sudden destruction in 1 Thessalonians 5:3 is debated, as we discussed earlier. Interestingly, the Bible also speaks of alliances and treaties between nations. Psalm 83, for example, describes a confederacy of nations plotting against God's people. While trade deals are primarily economic, they can also forge political alliances and dependencies. Could these evolving relationships, driven by economic interests, potentially align with such prophetic descriptions in ways we don't fully understand yet? The historical and prophetic context of Psalm 83 is debated among scholars. Also, alliances formed through trade can serve various purposes, not necessarily hostile ones. The very act of nations coming together to negotiate and agree on terms, while seemingly positive, could also be viewed through a more critical prophetic lens. Revelation 17:12-13 mentions 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Could the process of international agreements and the ceding of some national sovereignty in economic matters be a subtle precursor to a future alignment of power? The 10 kings and the beast in Revelation are highly symbolic and subject to diverse interpretations. Also, international cooperation and agreements are often seen as necessary for global stability and progress. Again, it's vital to emphasize that these are explorations of potential connections, fueled by curiosity and a desire to understand how current events might align with biblical prophecy. We are not making definitive statements. The future remains unknown, and the interpretation of prophecy requires humility and careful study. It is important to always ground our understanding in the core message of the gospel: love, redemption, and the hope found in Jesus Christ. Prophecy should encourage watchfulness and preparedness, not fear or speculation that leads to division. What are your thoughts on these potential links? Do you see connections between these trade deals and other perceived fulfilled prophecies? Let's continue this fascinating discussion in the comments below. Your insights and perspectives are valuable. Thank you for joining me on this journey of exploration.